I've had this feeling that you should know your own country, and the activist in me wants to be able to help public discussion about our own society, our own future, I think to make it more equitable and fair and more transparent. I think that's one of my aims, and I think a good commentator or researcher on politics can be a skilled observer of the way things are done. So to know the nitty-gritty, to know the inside, but to also be concerned about the personalities. I try to be sympathetic to politicians and those who get involved in politics, and I think one of the trends of the last 20 years has been much greater cynicism about the political system, and it's okay as long as it's a healthy scepticism, but I think sometimes it becomes a feeling that everything's wrong with the world, and the problem is that it's caused by the political system. I actually think we often take far too little responsibility ourselves. That old saying, we get the politicians we deserve. On the one hand, I think they're not too bad, and there's never been a golden age where they were any better. And the reason for that is that they are basically a reflection of ourselves, and you get the good, the bad and the ugly. And there's actually easier ways to earn $1. Religion doesn't feature in Australian politics in the American sense of a sort of an overheated fundamentalist approach to religion and politics, and I think that is a good thing. My view has always been that religion has a place, but it has to take its place alongside all the other interests in society. I think Australians are, perhaps because of our laconic nature, a bit wary of people who believe in things too strongly. I think that applies both to religious belief and secular belief. I think a sort of a laid-back, occasional church-going, semi-agnostic set of beliefs is one which actually most Australian Prime Ministers have held, and which Australians are probably much more comfortable with. I think Kevin Rudd probably has been our most overtly Christian religious Prime Minister. I think in John Howard's case, I would say that of his government as a whole. I don't think Howard himself was as religious in his persona as Kevin Rudd, but certainly a number of those around him were, and the government as a whole came to take on that flavour as far as the community is concerned. I tend to downplay the direct influence of religion over policy. The media tends to concentrate on a narrow band of socio-moral questions, and most of the social conservatives on those questions, two at the moment are gay marriage and euthanasia, their attitudes, I'm sure, are located in their religious belief. But when you look more generally, I think the Australian way is to try and keep the religion out of politics, unless it's not in policy terms anyway. When politicians see a political advantage in terms of scoring votes at an election, I think Kevin Rudd certainly aimed to make the Labor Party more saleable by positioning himself as sort of a Christian socialist, someone who could connect with evangelicals as well as those in the more traditional churches. So it played an electoral role for Kevin Rudd. And for John Howard, I think his religious persona played a role perhaps in shoring up his the more conservative side of his constituency, and ran through some of his decisions on socio-moral issues. But in general, no, I don't think it has that sort of effect. It's true that our system is set up to encourage opposition, in a sense, to encourage the government and the opposition to be adversaries. It's an unusual structure in that sense, more so than even the American system, where you don't have a formal opposition. I still think that consensus or basic agreement should be the default position, and that is, once you've had your say, I believe people of goodwill on both sides of politics should agree about the majority of policies that are discussed in the Parliament. Not agree absolutely, so there's a great role for amendment, both in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. There's a great role for learning from one another. And maybe I'm an idealist and out of touch, but I'm disappointed when political leaders, I think, go one step too far. Part of it's a question of language and the style in which debate is conducted in the chamber, and I think there's been too many instances recently when that has it hasn't been conducted in the style that I think it should be. Eureka Street represents in its approach to political debate just the sort of values that I would like to see in politics itself. That is, I'm opposed to too much unnecessary adversarialism. I'm opposed to stridency and negativity in political debate, and the positives, the opposites that I really appreciate are writing which is incisive but is also measured, which sees both sides of the argument, which, if not in the centre, at least is one which should appeal, I think, to thinking people on both sides of politics, and it's largely about a compassionate approach to social policy in particular. Certainly foreign affairs and economic policy are covered, but I see the contribution to social policy as one where, through the writings of people like Frank Brennan and Andrew Hamilton and Moira Rayner and Tony Kevin, as having a distinctive voice, a voice which you don't hear often enough in the big mainstream, and yet has the respectability through Eureka Street of reaching that wider audience.